Welcome back, y'all. So this is going to be Unit 1, Day 3. This is going to be Islam in Africa and the Rise of African Civilizations. Reminders to have your history notebook out and you're taking notes as we move through the video. Please make sure that you're completing the vocabulary for this video as well. So our key terms for today are going to be Mali, Sundiata, Mansa Musa, Songhai, Sonni Ali the Great, Askia Muhammed, Swahili city-states, Zimbabwe, and Dhow Ships. So our key concepts today are going to be political development in post-classical Africa, the economic development in Africa, the impact of the slave trade, the African to African, and then Islamic to African slave trade, which are going to be very different than the European slave trade. So, of course, our big trade route for this time is going to be the Trans-Saharan trade route. Of course, they're going to use camels. Camels quicken the pace of communication and trade across the Sahara Desert. And Islamic merchants is going to cross via camels across the Sahara Desert into Western Africa, and from Western Africa into the Middle East. So our first big kingdom in Africa that we're going to talk about is going to be the Kingdom of Mali. And the rise of the Kingdom of Mali really kind of begins in about 1230 with the Lion Prince Sundiata, and he's going to build the Mali Empire. Now, after Sundiata dies, the ruling elites and families are going to convert to Islam, and his grand nephew Mansa Musa who reigns from 1312 to 1337, he's Muslim, and he's going to be the first person of color that's not Arab to make his pilgrimage to Mecca. And his pilgrimage is not just we're going to walk to Mecca. Of course, he's a ruler, so he has to provide tithing and bring lots of gold and money in order to help mosque and kind of spread Islam and kind of help the church and the religion. And he has thousands of soldiers and piles of gold, and he spends so much gold and he gives so much gold that he devalues the price of gold in Egypt by 25%. So to put that in perspective, that'd be worth, if Jeff Bezos spent enough money in a year, that the dollar goes from being worth one of itself to 75 cents of itself. Now, upon Mansa Musa's return to Mali, he's going to build mosques. He's going to send students from Mali to study with Islamic scholars. He's also going to have several of these Islamic scholars establish one of the first universities and hospitals in West Africa. And the university is going to be the university at Timbuktu. And a hospital will also be in Timbuktu. Now, Mali gained most of its wealth through its control of gold and salt, and due to its location, it was able to tax all trade going through West Africa. Now, of course, like most civilizations, of course, it's going to have a decline. Factions within the central government cause it to decline due to infighting. Military pressures from neighboring kingdom as well as desert nomads will eventually cause the Kingdom of Mali to fall. Right. Our next civilization is going to be the Songhai Empire, and it's going to be built by a gentleman by the name of Sonni Ali the Great, who's going to build up his cavalry and war fleet, and eventually he will conquer this Kingdom of Mali, and he's going to conquer Timbuktu. And Sonni Ali the Great is very anti-Muslim. He saw them as a threat. But after his death, the next person in charge would be Askia Muhammed, who seized power after his death and who was a devout Muslim. And he promoted Islam. And once he consolidates power and gets the government organized, he's going to launch several religious wars in North Africa. And eventually he's going to be declared the Caliph of the Sudan due to his land control and his presence and his faith for Islam. He's going to build a very centralized state using Muslim scholars and jurists as his advisors. Now, he is also going to keep several of his culture's original traditions, such as sacred drum, sacred fire, and sacred dress. The traditional dress of the Songhai Empire. Now, they're going to trade in cola nuts, gold, slaves, and they're going to trade these things for horses, salt, luxuries, and finished goods. Now, in the 16th century, the 1700s, civil war is going to erupt, along with drought, desertification, which is when the desert begins to overtake your farmland. It's going to hurt the economy, and of course, diseases can destroy any empire, no matter how strong or powerful they are. And eventually, the Moroccan Empire will invade and destroy the state in order to control the massive amount of gold that passes through this region. Now, let's divert real quick. Let's talk about slavery. Now, slavery in Africa is going to be very different than what we will consider European slavery. Slavery in Africa, most slaves are going to be either captives of war, they're going to be debtors or criminals. They're often used as domestic laborers, especially in agriculture. But there's generally not a social stigma attached to them, meaning that, yep, you're a slave, but that doesn't make you less than anybody else. You got caught up in a bad time, you're now a slave. And even slaves could be free and become part of the family and tribe that they were a slave for. And a big one, which is very different than European slavery, and especially when slavery comes to the Americas, is that children born to slaves are not slaves. That's a very important difference between European slavery and African slavery. Now, when it comes to the Islamic African slave trade and African slave trading, after the 1000s and the 11th century, slave trading increased. And between 750 and 1500, more than 10 million slaves are going to be transported by the Islamic slave trade. Now, the demand for slaves kind of increased, and due to this increase in slave trade, or increase in slave demand, because originally Islamic traders and slave traders would get their slaves from kind of southeastern Europe in what were called the Slavic regions, which is where we get our term for slave, slave, and Muslims actually preferred Caucasian slaves. But most slave trade, if not traded directly from African traders, were slave raids against smaller states and stateless societies. Muslims, on the other hand, if you were a devout Muslim, you could not be used as slaves due to the Quran. But when prophets involved, things tend to get ignored. Now, moving back into our Swahili city-states, we have the Swahili city-states are going to be an intermarriage of Bantu and Arab cultures, which produce the Swahili culture. And Swahili actually comes from the Arabic term meaning coaster, because they're along the coast of Africa. And they're going to dominate the African coast. Now, Swahili city-states, chiefs gain power through taxing trade on their ports. The ports are an easy way to trade through maritime trade or ship trade. And they're actually going to gain control from trade from the interior, because if you're trading from the interior, you got to get somewhere. You hit the coast, you got to trade out to the Indian Ocean. So they're going to control slaves, gold, ivory, spices. They're going to tax all of these things to gain wealth, and they're also going to take some of those same things and trade them themselves, and get things like finished goods, cloth, dyes, and luxuries. And again, they're going to trade in the Indian Ocean. And they also adopt what are known as Dhow ships, which are extremely effective trading ship. Now, Islam in East Africa, really the only wealthy and elite converted to the Islamic faith, and due to this, due to the traders converting to the Islamic faith, this conversion promoted close cooperation with Muslim merchants, which increased trade. Now, our next one is going to be Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe, a rise in Central Africa and the wooded and grass savannas. They're rich in minerals, especially copper and gold, and they're really going to arise in the 13th century. Now, Zimbabwe also organized the goal of the flow of gold and ivory. Their trade also included slaves, but their biggest, or one of their biggest sources of trade is going to be the trade in cattle. And they're also going to trade with the Swahili city-states as well as Muslim traders along the coast. So that's going to be our end for today. Remember, you should have taken notes and followed along, and be sure that you are finishing the vocabulary, which is going to be at the start of this video and then down in the description. Thank you guys, and I'll see you guys in class.